People often see expat life as luxury, traveling the world, living comfortably. What they don't always see are the quiet challenges: loneliness, language barriers, parenting far from home, and of course, rebuilding genuine connections. Living abroad has shaped me deeply, and I believe many of us forget to honor the, the growth that we have gained through these experiences. That's why I created Rooted and Routed, a podcast where I sit down with guests to have honest conversations about identity, resilience, transformation, and of course, parenting abroad. If this resonates, I would love for you to follow and subscribe my channel. Every follow helps me and my team to bring more diverse, meaningful conversations. And this motivates us also to do more and move forward. So please subscribe and follow the channel. Shall we start? Hi, welcome to Rooted and Routed. My name is Sabia Batan Bithuk, and I'm back with another guest. This one, what can I say? This one is a special one. She's from UK, but she's based in Malaysia right now. And there's one thing that we universally speak a lot about, and that is empathy. She seems to be expertise in that. She's an advocate of empathy. Let me introduce you, Mimi Nicklin. Mimi, welcome to the podcast. Thank you really for giving your time. And it's really an honor to have you on the podcast today. We're going to explore a lot about empathy. But let me first, let me have you and introduce yourself and your background.
Oh, well, Sabia, thank you so much for having me. And I really resonate with the work you're doing and the reason you have this show. And I think so much of what I passionately talk about, which, as you said, is empathy, is reconnecting people, finding ways to connect, comes to life through exactly what you're trying to do with the show. So I'm really happy to be here. As you said, I'm originally from the UK, but I've been living in Asia and the Middle East for nearly 20 years. So the majority of my adult life. So when people ask me, where are you from? I always find that really hard to answer because I'm like, well, I know where my passport is from, right? My passport is British, but my soul, my family, my life, as I said, has been in the East for, for 20 years. So I think I'm a bit of a global citizen by now. And India is a huge part of my life. So the fact that we can have this conversation between Malaysia, where I live, and India, where you live, is a real honor.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad that you said that. But one thing that's true that I've seen all your other podcasts and interviews, there's one thing that is unexplored, and that is your story as an expat. You've been an expat and let's say citizen since 20 years.
Yes.
What is it that is untold part of your journey that you can share today with us? And
Oh,
that has also shaped you who you are today.
yeah. Look, I think you're going to need to pull it out of me because I can't think like off the top of the head of, exactly what's sort of untold. But what I can tell you and can lead into our conversation is that being an expat is a huge part of my identity, I guess. Funnily enough, I don't use the term expat as much anymore as perhaps I used to, and that might be an interesting conversation. I think when I started this journey, the first country I went to live in was Hong Kong, actually. And from there, I went to South Africa. Then I went to Singapore, where I spent time in Dubai, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Spain, all over the place. Some cities have a very strong expat community.
You're right.
Dubai, Hong Kong, Singapore, right? Where you get really big groups of expats and they tend to gather as expats. And there's a lot of activities for expats, and there's like an expat life. Some cities, like Colombo, like Johannesburg, like Cape Town, like Kuala Lumpur, where I live now, the term expat sort of disappears. You're then referred to as a foreigner. You're definitely not from here,
Yeah.
but it's not really expat life. I can't really explain why, but we can talk about it. Um, but certainly the identity of being a foreigner, right? An outsider in a foreign land is a huge part of who I am, who I have always been. But at the same time, I'm never going home, right? I'm never going back to where I came from, I should say. So my soul is here. So in terms of the story that other people don't know, as you said, I don't talk about that journey very often because I spend most of my time talking about where we are right now. But it has been nearly 20 years of traveling around those countries, meeting amazing people, and seeing all different dimensions of what home can really mean, I think.
I think I didn't know that you've been to so many countries. So that is really a massive, because in my list, what I knew from all the on the website, I thought like, okay, she's come from UK, she's been to Dubai, and she's also lived in Dubai and then now in Malaysia. But indeed, like if you've been to Colombo and Spain, so that's a lot of countries. Any cultural, any memorable cultural shift that you noticed during your journey there that has shaped your sense of belonging? Because at the end of the day, as you said, we become global citizen and it's difficult to call a place home. But then what is exactly home for you?
I think for me, I always say to people that home is where my pets are,
Yeah.
because of course my daughter I can take with me everywhere, right? So I can go anywhere with my little girl. She's 7. But my pets, obviously you can move pets. I have. My pets have traveled the world with me. But predominantly they stay in one place, right? So when people say, where's home? I say, well, wherever my pets are, I have 2 dogs and 2 cats. That is where home is, right? That's for me what makes a house a home is having my animals in it. You can move your things, you can move your children, you can move school and all of those things, right? Um, so, for me, that is really important. I travel a huge amount with my work today. Most weeks I fly to the Gulf, to India, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, and I have a great connection to coming home. I love to travel. I love my work. I love to meet people. I just was in Oman last week, a phenomenal country. But there's something about that sense of coming home to familiarity. And often, this is interesting because often I grow very attached to my home airport. So the city I'm living in. So I've lived in Kuala Lumpur now for nearly 3 years. I lived in Dubai for 4 years. I lived in Singapore for 2 years. I lived in Hong Kong, many, many places. South Africa was the place I lived the longest. South Africa, I lived for nearly 8 years. The airports in the cities that I live in, I grow very attached to them. I think sometimes it's the smell, it's the decor, it's the signage, it's the train or the bus or whatever you have to get. That familiarity of landing in the airport, for me, there's just a great sense of peace when you come home to a city.
It's like becoming from foreign to familiarity, right? Uh,
Exactly.
and then when it comes to belonging, it is not just a place, I think. It is also, as you said, the smell.
Yes. And
Mm.
sounds right. There's a bird. I actually, do you know what? All these years, it must be 10 years. I still don't know what this bird is called. But in Sri Lanka, they call it the wedding bird
Oh,
because they say that she calls more in wedding season, which is now actually April, May. Very fortuitous time of year, the new year. She has a very specific call, this bird, and you find her in Singapore, in Malaysia. She's in Colombo. That bird call is, even my little girl from when she was really small, she was like 4, she'd be like, Mummy, that's your bird. I'd be like, yeah, my bird. Right. So sometimes it's a sound, when I wake up in the morning when I've come home and I hear that noise in the trees, I'm like, I know I'm home. So you're right. It's not always how things look. It's not always those stereotypical things like your own bed. For my mum will always say, when you're home, when you get in your own bed. I mean, I have a nice bed, right? But that's not really it for me. I think it's more subtle things for me, like the bird, obviously my animals, the smell of the airport, the sound of rain, little things that make me feel grounded, belonging, right? That I belong there. And I think, Sabia, one of the things that's been really important to me for this whole journey is um, to connect with local people as much as I can repeatedly. And what I mean by that is I will find one coffee shop and I will just go there all the time. There might be 10 that I like, but I will make sure that I go really, really often to one because I want them to know me, right? I want them to recognize me. I want them to say, welcome back. Because when you travel so much, those little moments of being seen, being recognized, shape your belonging. And for me, that's been really, really important. Do you understand? Does that resonate with
Oh,
you? You
yeah, yes, absolutely. And things that you said things about that we all know, but then we don't talk about it. That's the bird. So even in India, we have a specific bird. I don't know the name of it. And when that bird starts to coo, it means that it's the rain is on the way. The monsoon
ah,
season, yeah. And then that you will not find in Belgium, so where my husband comes from, or where I have lived as well, right? So in Europe, you will not find that. And when you beautiful, I mean, Europe is beautiful, but when it comes to winters, you will not find birds there.
mm,
There's one thing that living in tropical places, warm places like India, you have all these sounds, whether it is traffic or whether it is the nature sound.
yeah, sounds and smells as well, particularly in Southeast Asia. Even there's a smell. I can't explain the smell, and I want to be very careful the way I word it because I don't want it's actually a very kind thing. It's a very personal thing, but I don't want it ever to sound like I'm stereotyping people. But there is a smell of taxis,
Yeah.
like Ubers and taxis in Southeast Asia. It's not a bad smell. Um, and that same smell, you find it in various different Ubers, taxis in different South Asian countries. I cannot tell you what it is, but when I get in the car and smell, I don't even like it. I don't dislike it. It's just a smell. But when I'm in the car, I'm like, oh, I'm home, right? There's like again, I can't tell you what it is. It's not leather. It's not petrol. It's not air freshener. It's just something about Southeast Asian cars, not all of them, but some of them. So sometimes it's just like a sense that, as you said, you recognize it, but we don't really think about it.
Hmm.
And often, Sabia, it's children that make you realize these things because it was often my daughter who will say, oh, mummy, it's that bird again. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it is. Or, oh, mummy, it always sounds like that here, doesn't it? And I'm like, yeah, it does. So children are really, they have this perception that sometimes we miss as adults because we're so busy.
Yeah, yeah. I think the sensory feelings of each place is different. Uh,
Mm.
there's something in the air. There's some scent of the soil, and not necessarily bad, right? It is a
Not
mish.
a bad smell, not a good smell, just a smell.
Yeah, it's a mishmash of a lot of things, honestly.
Mm.
But yeah, that's how the home is, right? It's sense of belonging is through visuals and also feelings, like something that you don't see, unseen feelings, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and when I think there's also for me, and this is the reason I live in Asia and continue to live in Asia and South Asia specifically, it's a very collectivist society. So people live in groups. In India, it's the same. We live in communities. We move in groups, and that's partly because of, there's such large populations. We eat in groups. We travel in groups, right? And when you've lived in Asia, or perhaps you've grown up in Asia, but when you've been here for a significant part of your life, when you go back to individualistic societies like Europe, it feels very cold. And I don't just mean the weather, just life feels cold, right? It feels like people are very separate from each other. Here in Malaysia and in most of Asia, I feel, but if I needed help with my daughter, if she's a bit bigger now, but if she fell or if I don't know, dropped the shopping or needed help getting up the stairs or something, there's always people to help me. People help. But I feel like often in the more individualistic societies, you're a bit more alone. You kind of pass through life a little bit more alone. I don't know, Sabia, you said you lived in Belgium as well as India. Have you experienced that?
So I lived in Sweden, I lived in Belgium, and also for a very short period in US.
Hmm.
There it is indeed. I feel like it's more being independent, the factor of you have to be independent since the childhood, that has that is quite deep in the society there. So
Mm.
independently taking care of your stuff as a child, right, in the school, independently when you need anything, or let's say grocery, you need to manage yourself. You cannot be asking your neighbors.
Mm.
You're lost in the direction. There is no such culture that you just stop the car, the windows down, and ask somebody, okay, do you know that direction? That is not done. Okay, that is something that I've noticed. When I got married, and that was for me the culture shock. And we were stuck at some place and we needed some direction. And GPS was rather quite new. And we had this Tom Tom, I don't know.
Yeah,
Tom.
I remember
Yeah.
Tom.
So we had that, and then my husband is like trying to struggling with the address and everything. I said, like, can you not just ask? There's so many people around. Just ask. And he said, like, no, but then no, we can't do that. Like, why not? And that's where the culture comes from. So really being independent really teaches you to be a little bit whole. That comes from having this shield around, I feel, maybe.
Mm.
But yeah, from culture to culture, things are different of belonging and yeah, but I get it what you said. You're right.
Mm. Yeah, it just feels different. I mean, for me, I could never leave. I never leave the East ever, ever. I know. I mean, I love the Gulf, so I'm kind of including that in when I talk about the East. But the Gulf as well. I've lived there. I do a lot of business there. Also, very inclusive societies, and I think as a woman, there's very strong camaraderie amongst women in just general life scenarios, which I also really, really enjoy in this part of the world.
Well, that's beautiful that you get to travel like that with your work and then explore different cultures and also have this introspection and reflection of your own. And then I think that is the process of learning,
Mm.
or while you have a business, like I think I'm going to talk about your empathy everywhere. Okay, you built that as an expat, if I'm not wrong, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Your first book, Softening the Edge, became a global bestseller by highlighting the 30-year-old global empathy deficit and the impact of it on people and work. What inspired you to write that? Any moment that probably helped through your travel as an expat journey that triggered that exploration? Or was it something that you had in your mind all the time? And because these things come when you observe, and to observe, you need to be out of your comfort zone, I feel. Sorry, that was a long question, but yeah, I'm
No,
gonna.
no, it's perfect. I think the answer is yes and no in terms of kind of the role of being an expat. Did that inspire the book? I think in many ways, yes, because I wrote that book on the back of a move to Dubai. So I had moved to Dubai to take over a business, and that business was, let's say, not quite in the state that it had been sold to me to be in when I made the decision to move there. And the process of me sort of overcoming some of the barriers of running that business, turning that business around, led me to write that book. So, yes, if I hadn't have been, I guess, an expat, if I hadn't had traveled beyond my borders, across countries to businesses unknown in lands I had never been to, I definitely wouldn't have written that book. On the other side of that, did I always want to do this? No. And I do believe, people ask me, Sabia, all the time, how did you find your purpose? And I always say to them, I didn't. It found me, So if I had never left, say, South Africa, which is where I was a very long-term resident, would I still have done this work? I believe so, because I think this was my purpose. This was what I was put in the world to do. Um, but certainly traveling has inspired more of it. My new book comes out this summer. It's called The Connection Prescription. And that book contains many, many stories. I was editing it this morning, actually, and it has stories from India. It has stories from sort of ganglands in South Africa, all the way to, really beautiful urban capitals across Asia. Even trips to places like the Czech Republic, where I had never been until last year. I went for an event, I know. Um, so yeah, so my travel, the ability to live in other people's cultures and contexts has definitely helped me with how I unpack empathy, the work I do, the way I think I'm able to connect across audiences, whether I'm in India wearing a sari, talking to, let's say, for example, a very, I don't know, Hindu audience versus being in Oman, fully covered in a abaya, talking to a Muslim, predominantly Muslim audience.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where I go, right? Whatever the audience, whoever they are, my passion is to connect with them and to do that in a way that helps me understand them, but also helps them understand me, right? Helps us connect in a way that reduces barriers. And I think that, yes, being an expat enables me to do that. I can engage with many cultures and talk about many cultures because I've been lucky enough to live with them, which is really the best way to understand.
I think that is beautiful because not everybody can embrace and switch and shift their mindset the way you do, right? It's not just the costume or the outfit that you wear. It's really, in many ways, also. Have you lived in India, by the way? I don't think so, right?
No, I know I've not lived. It's on my list though. I'm going to find a reason to come.
But then the way you adapt the sari, because that's a different outfit, but it's not just that, right? It's really understanding the audience, which is different.
People respond so beautifully, Sabia. When I first started this journey, and actually, if we talk about the abaya, for example, in the Gulf, and maybe the first trip I went, I just wore the abaya, which is the long, like coat-like dress that Arab women wear, right? And I was told, you absolutely do not have to cover your hair. You do not need to wear the headscarf. But I wanted to be respectful, so I wore it, but with my hair, like this. So my hair was down, but I had the scarf on, so you could see, like, the bottom of my hair. And then as time progressed, I became more confident and actually just loved it in my ability to lean into that culture and be accepted by women and men in that culture. So if you, for example, look at the photos of me in Oman last week, you'll see I am now in those markets fully covered, right? So all hair completely covered. And what I found, contrary to my fear, so my fear was, will people, I don't know, judge me for trying to be like them, for trying to connect and share in their culture? Will they think like, why is she doing that? She's not from here. That was my fear.
Yeah.
What I found, same with the sari, what I found was the more I wear it, the more accepted I become. Not just from women, the women start it. So the women will come and really say, oh, you look beautiful, or I love your dress, or whatever. But as I became more confident, men became more confident too. And even very conservative Arab senior vice president of something men will come to me and tell me how grateful they are that I have lent in to wearing their national dress or their respectful norms. So the more I do it, the more, first of all, I love it. And you can see that in every photo I ever take. I just love it. But
That's
second
that.
of
Yeah.
all, yeah, I find so much connection um, from people. And I think I would encourage any expats who are listening to this just to lean in. Don't worry about being different. If I worried about that for the last 20 years, and I did in the beginning, I would constantly live outside. But I don't. I believe that as people, we are all more alike than we are different. And if you lean into that, on the whole, people will invite you in, and they have. So I've been really lucky.
I think empathy is really needed, the basic thing, right? The first stepping stone. Through empathy, you can just try maybe with the outfit as you tried, and you see the change in the reactions around you. And
Yes.
that is then the ball starts rolling, because then you want to lean in more, not just the outfit, but okay, what is it culturally that they like or they dislike? And then you start to become protective about it. Like, I have to be careful not to have this faux pas, right? You start to do that. But okay, the first stepping stone is, I feel, empathy, and through you empathize the people around you, empathize the culture around. Uh, yeah, I think you got a chance to do that, and I think that is the reason why you are where you are.
I hope so. I mean, I hope so. And you're absolutely right. The clothes you wear is just one thing,
Yeah.
right? It's one sign that you are asking for acceptance, right? That you are willing to respect and you're trying to show respect. But as you said, it's just clothes. They're important, but they're just clothes, right? I think you're right. What comes after that is really making an effort to empathize, to understand, right? How do people communicate? How do they eat? How do they share? How do they travel? how do they learn? Sometimes I will go into, for example, my very first, I wrote about it in the prologue to my brand new book. So I'll have to make sure you get it when it comes out because it's this story. But my very first well paid, all expenses paid trip as a keynote speaker. Until then, I'd done bits and pieces all over. But the first time that a client called and said, I'm going to fly you across the world and business class seats and all expenses paid and paying proper fees and all that stuff, right? The first time that happened, it was to Bangalore. And so I did that, I flew off to Bangalore and went to this big conference with a very big Fortune 500 brand. And I was there early, obviously, always to, look at the audience and see what's going on. And two things happened. First of all, I got to this stage. They never told me this, but it was a 360 stage. In that, there was audience the whole way around, the whole 360. So normally when you have a 360 stage, there's actually only audience for the first, that kind of semicircle, and the rest is backstage. But this stage, there were people the whole way around, which means that you have to keep walking in circles, right, to present, because otherwise your back is going to be to people. You can't do a keynote with your back to people.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I can adapt. The second thing I noticed after the stage was that the majority of the audience was men. I mean, overwhelmingly, like 85%. And they were all in black or grey, right? So it was just this sea. It happens quite often in Southeast Asia. This sea of men in grey and black. And I'm very aware, and this day I was not in a sari, this was at the very beginning, very aware that I'm very different and I'm a foreigner and I don't look like them and I don't sound like them. And, I have to find a way to connect with them. And it was one of my first ever lessons in adaptation to culture and just making sure that, of course, I knew what I was going to say. I had my slides, but making sure that I was able to deliver that to that audience. And it really changed the way I became a keynote speaker across all of these cultures, because now I never, ever, ever do the same speech twice. Because if you want to connect with an audience, you need to connect with that audience, right? And I think in places like the US, there's many keynote speakers who just do the same speech over and over and over and over and over again for years. Maybe that's because their audiences are slightly more homogenous, similar.
Yeah.
But for me, it's always been about understand the people in this room. Understand what do they need to hear today. Of course, I have my theme. We're going to get there. But how do you package that for them in this moment, in this room, in this culture that I can sense as I walk in? And I think I learned that from being an expat, right? From working, for example, with the Arabs, with the Chinese, with Africans, with all different nationalities. They all have different ways of living. And I think once you're able to flexibly move between those groups, you can connect with everyone.